Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Wednesday, June the 16th, 2021. So let's begin with Joe Biden, world statesman. Here's a story from the Daily Mail. Wise guy Joe snaps at press for asking if he's confident Putin will change after he threatened Russia with a response if they hit a red line list of 16 non-hack infrastructure targets. Joe Biden said that he warned Putin Wednesday that Russian cyber attacks on critical U.S. infrastructure would draw a serious American response. He told his counterpart just how harmful a cyber attack might be on an oil pipeline that is the lifeline of the Russian economy. Biden threatened retaliation and made his explicit comment publicly, even as he denied making any kind of a threat in his meetings with the Russian president, as they discussed ransomware attacks that shut down the Colonial Pipeline and has other U.S. and multinational businesses on edge. His saber rattling came during a contentious press conference where he also shouted at a CNN reporter who yelled out a question, asking why he was so confident the Russian strongman would change his behavior, given his denials and his history. "I'm not confident I'll change his behavior. What do you do all the time?" he sneered. Biden walked up to the reporter with his suit jacket off on an unusually hot day and accused her of not knowing her business, gesticulating while holding his Ray-Ban sunglasses. "When did I say I was confident? What I said was, let's get it straight," Biden intoned. "I said what will change their behavior is if the rest of the world reacts to them and it diminishes their standing in the world. I'm not confident of anything. I'm just stating the facts." Minutes after the tense exchange, Biden sought to clean up the incident, speaking with traveling reporters under the wing of Air Force One. "I shouldn't have been such a wise guy with the last answer I gave," Biden said. The reporter Biden chewed out, CNN's Caitlin Collins, said on air that she was just doing my job and said Biden didn't need to apologize. She called it completely unnecessary and said he did not have to apologize, though I do appreciate that he did. So here we have Joe Biden threatening Russia. Threatening Russia with what exactly? How many sanctions has the United States already imposed on Russia or anyone who does any business with Russia? What exactly is Biden threatening? Again, is he threatening to get into a cyber war with Russia? Is he threatening perhaps a nuclear exchange with Russia? You know, the media seems to be taken aback by Biden's behavior, even though he has been this way for decades. This is a fellow who was elected to the U.S. Senate when he was, 27 years old in 1970, was it 1972 or 1974? That is to say, he's been living in a bubble for all that time. And the truth about Joe Biden is that he's a very nasty individual, calling people dog-faced pony soldiers and threatening people with an IQ test or with push-ups. And, oh no, Joe Biden, everyone loves Uncle Joe Biden. He eats ice cream and owns a Corvette. Well, yeah, okay. And Warren Buffett is this just this natural, sagely old man who likes nothing better than sitting on his porch in a rocking chair and drinking a Coca-Cola. It's all just theater. According to the Associated Press, President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin concluded their summit on Wednesday with an agreement to return their nation's ambassadors to their posts in Washington and Moscow, and plan to begin work toward replacing the last treaty between the two countries limiting nuclear weapons. But the two leaders offered starkly different views on different simmering issues, including cyber and ransomware attacks originating from Russia. Yes, the Associated Press is apparently determined, because they are arbiters of the truth, that these cyber attacks originated from Russia. Putin insisted anew that his country has nothing to do with such attacks, despite U.S. intelligence that indicates otherwise. And of course, you can always trust U.S. intelligence. Biden, meanwhile, said that he made clear to Putin that if Russia crossed certain red lines, including going after major American infrastructure, his administration would respond and, quote, "the consequences of that would be devastating, unquote. Both leaders, who have stirred escalating tensions since Biden took office in January, suggested that while an enormous chasm between the two nations remains, the talks were constructive. Putin said there was no hostility during 3 hours of talks, a session that wrapped up more quickly than expected. I suspect that Putin has the upper hand with Joe Biden because Putin, former intelligence officer as he was, knows some things about Joe Biden. He knows about Biden's activities in the Ukraine, knows about Biden's activities in China, and knows that Biden doesn't really want this information to get out. You know, when the New York Post publishes a story based on Hunter Biden's laptop, the entire rest of the media, except the Daily Mail, can just say, there's no story here. But if Putin were to make certain charges against Joe Biden, the media would they'd have to report it. They would simply have to. When it was over, Biden had first crack at describing the results at a solo news conference, with Biden following soon after. Biden said they spent a great deal of time discussing cyber security. Putin noted that Biden raised human rights issues with him, including the fate of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Putin defended Navalny's prison sentence and deflected repeated questions about mistreatment of Russian opposition leaders by highlighting U.S. domestic turmoil, including the Black Lives Matter protest and the January 6th Capitol insurrection. You see that the Biden administration has the same problem with Russia that they do with China. If your administration misses no opportunity to talk about how horrible your country is, racially and otherwise, and how it's been horrible from the beginning, then the leaders of China and Russia can simply say, why don't you fix your own problems first before going after us? And Putin had a great deal of fun with Biden afterwards. Again, from the Daily Mail, Putin on Wednesday described Joe Biden as very different from Donald Trump and turned any questions on human rights violations in Russia into attacks on violence in America. Biden is an experienced statesman. Putin said he is very different from President Trump. The Russian president started off his nearly 1 hour press conference on a cordial note, but then turned snappy when questioned on touchy topics, including Biden calling him a killer. Putin spoke first after he and Biden concluded their 3 hour meeting at a historic 18th century villa by Lake Geneva, giving his early spin on their meeting. Putin turned many of the questions into criticism of the United States, including the high levels of gun violence in America. You don't have to open your mouth and you're shot dead, he said, referring to mass shootings in the United States. Look at American streets. People are getting killed there. You can get a bullet in the neck. And when asked about human rights violations in Russia, he argued in return that the U.S. had secret CIA prisons. Is this how you protect human rights, he said? Guantanamo is still working. Nothing to do with human rights there, Putin said. Let's go to the chat. Talk about Trent Reznor, please. Kurt Cobain's widow attacking him, making her usual wild charges. You know, there was a deposition that Kurt Cobain's and Courtney Love's daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, filed in her lawsuit against her mother, which was, you can find it on the web. It's absolutely hilarious. Essentially, Frances Bean Cobain was saying that Courtney Love is such a horrible person that her pets, both a dog and a cat, attempted to kill themselves in order to get away from her. Hello to Ann Run, Dan, Dawn from Beyond. Thank you for your kind words. Hello to Yo Mama, Chokakin 666, Palpcasso 88, Hauper. Hello to Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Thank you for your work. KMG, did you already cover Rusha's book? Yes, I did last Friday. Ann Run says Putin is Vito Corleone and Biden is Fredo. Roulette Crack says they keep talking about Russian provocation when the whole time provoking Russia. Yes, it's not very good. It's not a very good idea to call the leader that you're supposed to be engaging in diplomacy with a killer. in the same way that it's not really a good idea to engage in shortly before you engage in talks with the Prime Minister of Great Britain to carry on about how evil Great Britain is being in Northern Ireland and issuing a stern diplomatic rebuke of that country. I remember when I was a young man back in the 1970s, the media had a great deal of fun with Jimmy Carter's administration. And that the gist of the joke was that these people were simply not up for the job. Despite the fact that one of Jimmy Carter's campaign slogans in 1976 had been, "Why not the best?" Yes, they actually said that. But you notice this kind of coyness about the media's dealing with Biden, even though they know that he is a senile buffoon who might just, start World War III by accident. Astro 2 says Franklin cover-up was in Omaha, Nebraska, where Buffett was known as the Oracle of Omaha. The consequences will never be the same, says Chogokin 666 Cyber Police. They'd have to report it, but they'd also spin the hell out of it. More Russian lies. One of the great diplomatic foreign policy blunders of the last 100 years was when Great Britain, Anthony Eden personally, decided to escalate a spat with Mussolini over Ethiopia and effectively pushed Italy into Germany's arms. Well, for various reasons, some of them based on tribal resentment, the United States has decided to push Russia into China's arms. Putin has made it clear over and over again, including in an essay that was published a few years ago in the New York Times, that he desires a cordial relationship with Russia. But no. Has anyone pointed out that when Donald Trump announced that he was going to meet Putin in Helsinki, he was literally called a traitor for the crime of wanting to speak with Putin? But Biden meets with Putin in Geneva, and no, nothing wrong with that. Why wouldn't the president of the United States speak with the president of Russia? Let's see. Quachalango says Jimmy Carter, at least a Georgia Tech nuclear scientist. Phlegmatica says, wonder if Putin was having memories of the Yeltsin years talking to Biden. Biden hasn't been found yet naked except for his underwear on the streets at 4 o'clock in the morning looking to acquire a pizza. I mean, that hasn't happened yet. I guess he's well guarded, actually. So that's not going to happen. I was sent an essay yesterday by a fellow, Laramie Hirsch, which I'm going to read to you. And it's about Joe Biden here in Tulsa. Around this time last year, it begins, President Donald Trump visited my town. I swear that man brought an enormous amount of strange omens with him throughout his presidency. I say this because at the time of Trump's visit, the very city experienced a literal earthquake. How could such things continually tag themselves to the events of that man's presidency? It was wild. Yet such things often happened during Trump's presidency, love him or hate him. But when Biden came to town, he only brought hate with him. It was a tangled wad of hatred and animosity that he carried for his masters. Whoever controls him, Biden would be completely ignorable without the toxic words they put in his mouth. In fact, I can't even stand to listen to him. His are the words of an enemy who seeks destruction, not any leader of a nation. Some key statements from his speech in Tulsa cannot be ignored. Speaking to the 3 remaining survivors of the 1921 Tulsa race riot, Biden said, "You were the 3 known remaining survivors of a story seen in a mirror dimly, but no longer. Now your story will be known in full view." So 1921 was 100 years ago, and there are 3 people in Tulsa who actually survived this. How exactly did they survive it? Because they were 3 years old at the time? In any event, he's not wrong, Laramie Hirsch writes. And the story won't just be known in full view, but it will be illuminated, laminated, preserved, and preached from on high for years. Everyone across the land who hates America will recall this moment in history as a fulcrum for their unmeasured rage and hate for generations to come. A centuries-old wound will be torn open, kept fresh, kept bleeding, and salted. A century of civic nationalism, dialogue, federal programs, and a carefully directed pluralistic culture have served white people nothing. No amount of understanding, repentance, or goodwill shall ever destroy the grievance culture held so clearly by Biden's followers. Thanks to diatribes such as this, we've gone from calling that 1921 event the Tulsa Race Riot to instead calling it the Tulsa Race Massacre, whatever it takes to demonize white Tulsans to the nth degree. Weaponized language will not be withheld. And this is part of what Biden said. Despite rising Jim Crow systems and the reemergence of the Ku Klux Klan, Greenwood's economic prosperity grew, as did its citizens' demands for equal right. This made the community a source of pride for many Black Americans. It also made the neighborhood and its families a target of white supremacists. In 2 days, a violent mob tore down the hard-fought success of Black Wall Street, ho-ho, that had taken more than a decade to build. Biden is a liar. Biden claims here that when the white Tulsans had their own version of a BLM Antifa uprising in 1921, it was because of the animosity they held for a successful Black Wall Street. This is an untruth. A Black man was taken to jail after being accused of raping a white woman in an elevator. Armed Black veterans came to the courthouse in order to prevent a lynching. This inspired whites in the community to show up also with their weapons for fear of violence. Nevertheless, shots were fired, and in the beginning, several whites were killed along with some Blacks. Thus, the riots began. Biden states that as many as 300 people were killed, yet in reality, only 39 are confirmed dead. Of those, 26 were Black and 13 were white, but who cares? Whatever it takes for Biden to fan the flames against white America. He went on to complain about laws, building codes, and policies that made rebuilding impossible. Yet it was deep state social engineers who thought it best to sever the Black North Side from downtown Tulsa with their federal highway plans, the same species of deep state social engineers who couldn't give a damn about what the little guy wants or needs to survive, who controls the halls of power to this very day. Biden is literally complaining about the same people who control him like a puppet. Biden makes the following complaint during his proclamation: the federal government must reckon with and acknowledge the role that it has played in stripping wealth and opportunity from Black communities. Laramie Hirsch comments, this man and his handlers have no idea what they're talking about. It was his own ham-fisted people who destroyed Black communities. These same big government, globalist, civic national, melting pot Malthusians are the ones who forced an end to segregation. It was these very people who force-fed America's school bus programs. It is people like Barack Obama who continually insist on importing complete ethnic strangers into suburban white flight regions. It's rich leftists like himself who insist on buying up as much rural land as possible. It is these people who demand that not Americans continue to stream across the U.S. southern border like an unstoppable ocean current. Such policies destroy all communities. Black communities have no chance of withstanding the unending tide of whatever locusts fly over and strip away their communities. Gentrification of the Blacks' precious historic neighborhoods will never stop. Why? Because it is the hobby of Biden's Democrats, the lefts, the globalists, and every other deep state power to destroy whatever roots anyone tries to plant in this prison of every unclean and hateful spirit. Grievance culture is having a field day with Tulsa's history. I have already discussed how the Black Panthers decided to come to Tulsa and wave guns in Tulsa's face, threatening them, scoffing, and begging for reciprocation. These people were bussed and flown in. They were outsiders. They were not natives. They are not from here. But they want to use our history and our town for their own soapbox. When these people came into our city shouting black power, and demanding an escalation in racial hostilities, they were clearly trying to recreate the 1921 race riot. Back then, some Black men went to the courthouse with their guns, but they were met with white people with guns, and thus some ugly history was made. Yet this time, the whites showed that after a century of educating themselves and taking care to understand Blacks as best they could, opening their hearts to the endless grievance culture, I say the white Tulsans showed discipline. They showed they were not like the whites of 1921. They showed change, discipline, tolerance, and restraint. Of course, this only emboldens the outside-funded rabble-rousers. The noise of Grievance America will only grow louder, more abrasive, and eventually violent in this city. T-Town is being chosen as the next stage for racial conflict in this country, like it or not. The decision was never Tulsa's. It's a choice made by people with far more money than you will ever understand. Hirsch continues, and so we now suffer the likes of activists like Daniel Bernard Romain, a racist, white-hating bigot composer who writes songs that shout, "God damn America." Such people will now be invited here to Tulsa, probably to the delight of Tulsa World editors, local high art influencers, and various Tulsa University and Tulsa Community College instructors, all intrigued by the invective as though they'll always be immune to its results. And Hirsch concludes, Tulsa is often regarded locally as the buckle of the Bible Belt. Perhaps it's such Christian charity that prevents the people here from taking a dark path. Perhaps Tulsa's Christianity preserves them one way or another. But even though Tulsans aren't seeking a war, war is seeking Tulsa. More and more outsiders are streaming into the city like a river. The American locust phenomenon has no pity, no mercy, and shows no partiality. For one reason or another, this town is being chosen to be some kind of stage in the next act of America's drama. And like it or not, whatever may happen in the next 10 years, this city will never be the same again. In recent years, I had read in the local paper, perhaps it was an old copy of the Urban Tulsa, a sort of prediction from a homeless Tulsan. They said that something big is on the horizon for this city. They could feel it, something tectonic. And though our metropolis was about to become some sort of battlefield between angels and demons in some sort of grand fight. Looking at today's events, I cannot help but agree. God have mercy. Here's a story from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. A leaked Whitehall document seen by Politico suggests that perspex screens installed to stop the transmission of COVID-19 may actually have increased its spread. Businesses and schools were told by the government to install the screens as a condition of reopening after the first lockdown, and they were widely used by essential shops throughout the entire period. Politico's Alex Wickham writes that the perspex screens could be about to be scrapped, given new information the government has received on their efficacy. Quote, ministers are also being advised that those perspex screens that have appeared in some offices and restaurants are unlikely to have any benefit in terms of preventing transmission. Problems include them not being positioned correctly, with the possibility that they actually increase the risk of transmission by blocking airflow. Therefore, there is clear guidance to ministers that these perspex screens should be scrapped. Despite the report, government ministers say there is no plan to change advice on installing the screens in businesses. And more from Summit News. A new study out of Greece has found that the country's lockdown curfew may have increased the spread of COVID-19 because it reduced shopping hours and caused more crowding in stores. Analysts looked at data from two regions of the country, one from where a curfew had been imposed from 9 p.m. and another, the Attica region, which includes Athens, where a 6 p.m. curfew was imposed in February. Using Google mobility data, researchers analyzed how much time was spent at home and how much time was spent at grocery stores in each region 5 weekends before the change in curfew time and 4 weekends after. What did the authors find? Compared to Epirus and Western Macedonia region, the Attica region saw a small and statistically significant increase in time spent at home, as well as a small and non-significant decrease in time spent at groceries and pharmacies. In other words, the shift in the timing of night curfew had, at best, a marginal impact on mobility. And I'm going to check in on lockdown skeptics. Answering the call for news from the reopened states in America with which to shame our own glacial reopening in the UK, here is the first of the stories of freedom from the US. It's from Florida and written by Julian Bolter. We received a strong response to our call for freedom stories, and more will follow. Bolter begins, we are a family of 3 Brits, although my wife was born South Korean, living in Naples, Florida, for the past 6.5 years. Florida, in line with most other states, issued a shelter-at-home order lockdown in April 2020. But in Florida, this lasted only for 1 month. 8 states followed South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem's lead in not locking down at all, preferring to share the data with their populations and only making recommendations on behavior. Governor Noem has eloquently pointed out that all businesses are essential to those who own them, and it is not the government's place to decide otherwise. Between May and the end of August 2020, Florida gradually reopened against the wishes of President Trump, although schools did not resume in-person learning until the start of the 2020-21 year in August, and then with masks in classrooms. In September, Governor Ron DeSantis met with the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, Sunitra Gupta of the University of Oxford, Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford University, and Martin Kulldorff of Harvard, and took their advice about a focused protection approach rather than any continuing restrictions. He has subsequently issued executive orders that strengthen Floridians' rights to decide for themselves on mask wearing and taking the vaccine, and has banned vaccine passports. At the same time, he ensured care homes and the vulnerable were protected, witness a death per million rate that ranks around 26th of 50 states and is better than the UK, despite having some similarities with the UK. Same average age of population, same urban density, and worse metabolic health. I returned to the office in June 2020, no masks, and have been working there ever since. We had our first 2 cases of COVID-19 in May this year. Both have recovered and are back at work. My daughter has had to wear a mask to class, but that is all. The school averaged 4 to 5 cases a week, but did not shut down any classes at any time. Testing was not required. Her high school graduation was at the local concert center, which insisted on reduced numbers and masks. By contrast, the graduating students and parents' dinner at a local country club earlier had 300 people with no masks and a packed dance floor. We've been eating in restaurants for months. Last year, we went to the Florida Keys, driving twice, and drove up to St. Augustine for a few days earlier this year. We had friends drive across from Texas to stay with us for a few days back in May. We've been back in church and singing in the choir since well before Christmas, although we also had a separate service for those who wished to wear masks. It's worth noting that politics is very polarized here, and many are skeptical of President Biden, Dr. Fauci, and Bill Gates, and are reluctant to take the vaccine, so take-up appears to have stalled. Infections and deaths, however, have continued to decline. In fact, I think I know more people who will not take the experimental gene therapy than have had the vaccine. Governor DeSantis' current mantra is that Florida chose freedom over fascism. In a House of Commons vote this evening, 60 MPs voted against the extension of the restrictions, the largest rebellion Boris Johnson has faced yet in connection with his lockdown policies, although not enough to defeat the government, thanks to the support of Labour MPs. France is bringing forward the lifting of a nationwide curfew by 10 days amid falling numbers of daily positive COVID tests. Guidelines on mask wearing are also expected to be eased sooner than expected. Many care workers would rather quit than be forced to take COVID vaccine, says union boss. The GMB union has hit back against the prospect of care home workers being forced to take COVID vaccines. Rachel Harrison, GMB national officer, says the government doesn't have the foggiest idea or concern about the impact their decisions make on a workforce already suffering from many of the worst political failures during the pandemic. Totally effing hopeless. Boris Johnson's verdict on Matt Hancock. Of course, this comes from Dominic Cummings, the angriest man in England. So you can take that for what it's worth. And Euro 2020 and Wimbledon matches used as pilot events for new NHS COVID pass. Let's go to Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. And he has some fun with a fellow called David Gorski, MD, PhD. Today, in great moments in COVID panic porn, how much time should we give it? Gorski, is 14 months enough? Should people be allowed to church yet? And here is Gorski tweeting last April. Give it fool time. Give it time. Yes. No, couldn't have church. Couldn't have people going to church in April. But when? When are people going to be allowed back to church? Well, in Canada, say. Ever? These, as I said before, these are heady times for atheists, for Christophobes. Michelle Malkin tweeted, WTF Alex Berenson, some grace and humility would be wise. Dr. Simon Gold and America's Frontline Doctors are an extraordinarily group of brave, brilliant medical professionals, lawyers, pilots, parents, and patriots. Why behave the same way that so many intolerant elites have treated you? And Berenson responds, because I warned everyone publicly a month plus before 1/6 on Tucker Carlson, no less, that going down the election fraud rat hole was a mistake and would damage the pro-COVID reality camp. I'll just say this. I don't think that the two things have much in common, except that people who tend to believe the one believe the other. But as far as reality is concerned, our elites are not interested in reality because they construct their own reality. They decide what is true and what is not. They are the fact checkers. And let's go back to the chat. The Fed, the KKK has been heavily infiltrated by the FBI since the 1970s, and it's been a joke for a decade that anyone who actually went to a KKK, Klavan, is that what they call it, is going to find more feds than actual members. Hello to Frothing Fanboy. And Carter was the captain of a nuclear submarine, I believe, says Hauper. Yes. Okay. More than half, says Chadson. DB Cooper says 100% blood libel. Imagine the extravagant lies about the 2020 BLM riots in 2120. And Chadson adds the other half is the ATF. Anwin said, did Kevin discuss Kunstler's Monday column yesterday? If so, I missed it. In it, Kunstler wrote that the Biden administration has only a few months left to live. I didn't discuss it. I just, again, there's this tremendous sense of unreality about the Biden administration. And in fact, there's as much unreality there as there is in, say, Justin Trudeau's administration. Do the people who cover Justin Trudeau, despite the men and women with their obvious ferocious sexual attraction to him, do they believe that he actually constitutes some sort of leader, that he has any fitness for his position? Okay. And I wanted to talk about ruin in the context of J.R.R. Tolkien. There's a famous quotation associated with Adam Smith, where a young man called John Sinclair said, if we go on at this rate, the nation must be ruined. Smith replied, be assured, my young friend, that there is a great deal of ruin in a nation. Well, I guess we're going to play out that experiment where we're going to find out exactly how much ruin there is in our nations. That I was looking at Steve Saylor's website, and I came across something that people have said, well, this is a parody, is it not? No, it isn't. Here's the agenda for the Tolkien Society's Summer Seminar 2021. Gondor, here's one paper. Gondor in Transition, a brief introduction to transgender realities in The Lord of the Rings. Here's another. The Problem of Pain, portraying physical disability in the fantasy of J.R.R. Tolkien. The Burnt Hand teaches most about fire, applying traumatic stress and ecological frameworks to narratives of displacement and resettlement across cultures in Tolkien's Middle-earth. Here's a paper from Sarah Brown, The Invisible Other, Tolkien's Dwarf Women and the Feminine Lack. The Problematic Perimeters of Elrond Half-Elven and Ronald English Catholic. I have no idea what that could possibly mean. Pardoning Saruman, Christopher Vaccaro gives us this: the queer in Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. From Robin Reed, queer atheists, agnostics, and animists, oh my. Stars Less Strange. This is from Don Wall's Thumma, an analysis of fan fiction and representation within the Tolkien fan community. From Dana Peterson Deep Rose, Something Mighty Queer, Destabilizing Cis Hetero, Amatonormativity in the Works of Tolkien. Isn't it long past time for the universities to be pulled down and for salt to be strewn on the ruins? I'm going to read you something I wrote about Tolkien. When various recent readers' polls in recent years revealed the supreme popularity of Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, the critics were aghast. Germaine Greer spoke for them when she complained in 1997, "Ever since I arrived at Cambridge as a student in 1964 and first encountered the Ring cult, it has been my nightmare that Tolkien would turn out to be the most influential writer of the 20th century. The bad dream has materialized." John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, who lived from 1892 to 1973, was a private man. He was not a cocktail party, literary prizes man, nor a gossip column man, nor a "here is my signature to a mass letter to the Times on today's burning political issues" man. The only interest he demonstrated in his own celebrity was hostile, and he had no patience with the demands of the star-making machinery. A rather innocuous 1968 request from Time Life was met with this frosty reply: "Your ideas of the natural and mine are different, since I never in any circumstances do work while being photographed or talked to or accompanied by anybody in the room. A photograph of me pretending to be at work would be entirely bogus." And then I discussed the Lord of the Rings movies. And one can only imagine how Tolkien himself would have reacted to the movie's tie-in with Burger King. Its television commercial depicts cartoonish Dark Ages warriors tussling over tacky plastic lighted goblets, offered as an inducement, supplies are limited, to consumers of Whopper combo meals. At the end of the advertisement, the ring of the Lord of the Rings is incorporated into the Burger King logo. It seemed to have escaped the copywriter's notice that Tolkien's ring was a symbol representing the triumph of gold over love, that the Lord of the Rings is a celebration of exactly the opposite, and that the climax of the novel is the ring's destruction. Tolkien was not known for his sense of irony, but even he would probably find a grim delight in the latest practices of what is so rightly called Tinseltown. For although he was a man of the right, he did not worship at Adam Smith's shrine. He loathed classical liberalism and all its works. He was also what we would now call a green, someone right-wingers would mock as a tree hugger. He wrote in a 1972 letter to the Daily Telegraph, "In all my works, I take the part of trees as against all their enemies." He condemned the destruction, torture, and murder of trees perpetrated by private individuals and minor official bodies, and lamented that the savage sound of the electric saw is never silent wherever trees are still found growing. Tolkien was saddened to the core by what he saw as the Industrial Revolution's despoliation of his beloved English countryside. This feeling was probably best expressed in Hilaire Belloc's poem Hanneker Mill. Hanneker Hill is in desolation, ruin atop and a field unplowed, and spirits that call on a fallen nation, spirits that loved her calling aloud, spirits abroad in a windy cloud. Spirits that call and no one answers, Hanneker's down and England's done, wind and thistle for pipe and dancers, and never a plowman under the sun, never a plowman, never a one. As it turns out, a mill was central to Tolkien's private mythology. In his first newspaper interview in 1966, Tolkien told reporter John Ezard about Sarhole, his imaginative heartland, a small village near Birmingham, which was the starting point for his fictional Shire in both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. He remembered it was a kind of lost paradise. There was an old mill that really did grind corn with two millers, a great big pond with swans on it, a sand pit, a wonderful dell with flowers, a few old-fashioned village houses, and further away, a stream with another mill. I always knew it would go, and it did. Sarhol was long ago swallowed up by Sauron, like Birmingham, long condemned as England's ugliest city. The mill, however, survives. It has been restored and is now a tourist attraction. Tolkien lived in Sarhol for only 4 years, from 1896 to 1900, but it would not be an exaggeration to call it the Eden from which he was banished. He was born in South Africa to English parents. His father, Arthur, was a bank manager. Arthur Tolkien wished to return to England but could not find employment. So at the age of 3, J.R.R. Tolkien, his younger brother, and their mother went home alone. His father was to rejoin them when he could, but he died of rheumatic fever a year later. The widow Tolkien raised her boys well, but funds were short. Their situation was not improved when Mabel Tolkien converted with her children to Catholicism in 1900, alienating her Anglican family. It is difficult for us to imagine how strong the animus against papism was in middle-class England a century ago. Mabel Tolkien died exhausted in 1904. J.R.R. Tolkien, thereafter referred to her as a martyr. Her sons were given to the guardianship of Father Francis Morgan, and they practically grew up in the Birmingham Oratory. J.R.R. Tolkien was a good student, and Father Morgan took an especial interest in him. He was a kind but stern man. In 1908, the Tolkien boys moved into lodgings, and J.R.R. Tolkien fell in love with the landlady's daughter, Edith Faulkner. Father Morgan, fearing for his charge's studies, eventually banned him from seeing Edith for 3 years. He renewed his courtship in 1913, only to find that Edith was engaged. After some, mainly religious, difficulty, he married Edith in 1916. She was his wife until her death in 1971. They had 3 children. Tolkien took a first in English in Oxford in 1915. Directly after his marriage, he enlisted, was commissioned a lieutenant, as they say in England, and then posted to the Western Front. Joseph Pearce writes in Tolkien, Man and Myth, Tolkien was rescued from the animal horror by pyrexia of unknown origin, as medical officers called it. To the troops, it was simply trench fever. He was invalidated home, grateful to have escaped the nightmare. Many of his friends were not so lucky, joining the ranks of the bodies littering no man's land. After his return to England, Tolkien began work on the Silmarillion, an epic of Middle-earth, which was the soil from which The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings were cultivated. It was never finished. His son, Christopher, published a version of it after his father's death. Tolkien accepted a post at Leeds University in 1920. In 1926, he returned to Oxford, first as a professor of Anglo-Saxon, then as a professor of English. And after this, you might say, Humphrey Carpenter writes in his biography, nothing else really happened. Tolkien was not regarded as a brilliant teacher, not that teaching was much expected at Oxford at the time. His student, Kingsley Amis, later a famous novelist, wrote in his memoirs that Tolkien was the hardest lecturer I ever heard and the worst technically, incoherent and barely audible. Amis's assessment cannot be ascribed to his atheism and hatred of medieval literature. He rated C.S. Lewis, quote, the best lecturer I ever heard. At Oxford, Tolkien and Lewis collected an informal society of like-minded souls called the Inklings. Its other famous member was the apocalyptic novelist Charles Williams. They went on long walks or retired to pubs to drink beer, smoke, and talk of literature. Tolkien told John Ezard, every morning I wake up and think, good, another 24 hours pipe smoking. Tolkien's companionship was crucial in Lewis's journey to Christianity. Lewis repaid the debt by encouraging Tolkien's writing. The story that Lewis once reacted to a Tolkien reading with, oh no, not another effing elf, is untrue. It was Hugo Dyson who made this remark. Tolkien not only helped persuade Lewis of the truth of Christianity, he persuaded him of the truth of myth. Joseph Pearce recounts a crucial argument of 1931. Lewis explained that he felt the power of myths, but that they were ultimately untrue. As he expressed it to Tolkien, myths are lies and therefore worthless, even though breathed through silver. No, said Tolkien, they are not lies. At that moment, Lewis later recalled, there was a rush of wind which came so suddenly on the still warm evening and sent so many leaves pattering down that we thought it was raining. We held our breath. Tolkien resumed, arguing that myths, far from being lies, were the best way of conveying truths which would otherwise be incomprehensible. We come from God, Tolkien argued, and inevitably the myths woven by us. though they contain error, reflect a splintered fragment of the true light, the eternal truth that is with God. Myths may be misguided, but they steer, however shakily, towards the true harbor, whereas materialistic progress leads only to the abyss and to the power of evil. According to Tolkien, the story of Christ is simply a true myth, a myth that works in the same way as the others, but a myth that really happened. Tolkien's revelation not only explains the enduring power of myth throughout the ages, but the extraordinary success of his own novels. It was no accident that they first became bestsellers in the 1960s after they were taken up by the hippie generation. As Tolkien wrote in a 1968 letter, the behavior of modern youth, part of which is inspired by admirable motives, such as anti-regimentation and anti-drabness, is a sort of lurking romantic longing for cavaliers, and is not necessarily allied to the drugs or the cults of finance, which means idleness and filth. The reason that I read from this at such length is that it is good to be reminded that despite the filth, which I earlier described in these disgusting papers, with people imprinting their own vile view of the world onto J.R.R. Tolkien, Tolkien's works survive. That people can say whatever they like about them, but they can't change the works. Well, not at the present time. Again, by the physical media, well, you still can. Let's see. Emmett Kelly-Zur says, interestingly, the Ring movies omitted Tolkien's green return to the Shire toward the end of the Return of the King. Chokokin666 says, Zizek, best lecturer as far as saliva production. Roulette Crack says, Darwin begged for God's forgiveness on his deathbed. Yeah. Okay. Emmett Kelly-Zur says, I remember a Bush 43 official saying they make their own reality. Yes, that's I was referring to that. It didn't end well for the U.S., not that Bush and his people ever suffered. MC5, John Sinclair, the White Panther Party, the group, the MC5 for Motor City, they were from Detroit, were influenced by this crazy fellow called John Sinclair, who I believe was sentenced to 10 years in prison for possession of a single marijuana joint. Seems rather excessive. Okay, and here's some good news for you. From Summit News, Paul Joseph Watson, Hungary's National Assembly has passed a law that bans showing children under the age of 18 material related to homosexuality or transgenderism in education, on television, movies, or in advertisements. The vote passed earlier today by a huge margin of 157 to 1. RT reports the law was included in a larger bill cracking down on pedophilia by creating a register of child sex offenders, implementing stricter punishments for child pornography, and barring pedophile offenders from jobs where they would encounter children. It also singled out the promotion of alphabet people affairs in schools. According to a statement by the ruling party Fidesz, the law ensures that sex education in schools must not be aimed at promoting homosexuality or changing gender. After left-wing lobby groups opposed the law, protesters took to the streets of Budapest to demonstrate against it. However, their sentiments are not shared by the population, which voted overwhelmingly for right-wing Fidesz when the party was re-elected in 2018. Hungary is one of the few European countries that actively tries to protect its family-oriented and Christian heritage by moving to stop children being exposed to harmful information and lifestyles. The country's populist Prime Minister Viktor Orban has cultivated support by his efforts to defend the sanctity of the family in the face of rampant progressivism in other European countries. Last December, Hungary passed a constitutional amendment affirming the right of children to identify with their birth gender and defining marriage as between a man and a woman. Asserting that Europe's native population decline represented a sickness, Orban also oversaw a program to offer significant financial incentives for the country's own native citizens to have children, handing out loans of 30,000 euros to married couples who have 3 or more children, which are completely forgiven. And this loan is completely forgiven after the birth of the 3rd child. Last week, Orban also defended Hungarian football fans who booed Irish players taking a knee for Black Lives Matter, asserting that the gesture was a provocation based on white guilt over slavery and that Hungary would not be partaking in the virtue signaling act. Again, some good news for you. Moving on to Canada, I'm going to tell you the strange story of a woman formerly known as Trina Quack Quack, who is now called Mumilak Quack Quack. This is a real person, and she is an MP for Nunavut in the House of Commons in Canada. She changed her name to Mumilak, which means dancing little one, in Inuktitut. She said that she did this in order to reclaim her culture. I'm always curious as to what our leaders actually did in life before they started being paid to boss us around. According to Wikipedia, before her election to Parliament, she was a facilitator, which could mean anything, public speaker, and volunteer. Best known for a speech she made in the House of Commons on International Women's Day in 2017. In other words, she was a professional nuisance. On October 23rd, 2020, Quack Quack announced she would be stepping aside for at least 8 weeks for what she described as personal health problems based on advice from her doctor. Quack Quack returned on January 5th, 2021, citing extreme burnout, depression, and anxiety as the reason for her leave. This woman was simply not up to her job, but she decides that she's just going to stop working for 8 weeks until she feels better. Too sensitive for this world, it would seem. On April 19th of this year, Quack Quack claimed that mixed-race Labrador MP Yvonne Jones was not an Inuk, and Southern Labrador is not an Inuit region. Jones dismissed Quack Quack's comments as immature and naive. Quack Quack later issued an email statement apologizing, quote, for how I handled the situation. On May the 20th this year, she announced that she would not seek re-election in the next Canadian federal election. And the reasons that she gives for this are rather extraordinary. Again, I will mention that if you are a backbench, if you're an opposition MP, this is an exceedingly easy job. All you have to do is show up to vote. Now, because of the COVID-19 hysteria, MPs didn't have to show up to work anymore. They could participate in Zoom calls and asking questions. The question time, you don't write the questions. The questions are written for you by professional staffers. And again, you have to deal with the needs of your constituents. And believe me, I've spoken to MPs and they have told me the ridiculous things, favors that constituents want from them. For instance, true story. Oh, the Rolling Stones are coming to town. Yes, and I want tickets. You want me to get you tickets to a Rolling Stone concert. And I asked the MP, a former Liberal MP, I said, what did you do? He said, I got him the tickets. But you have professional staffers who are paid to work in your office. And this is from Maclean's by Shannon Proudfoot. Mumilak Quack Quack, it's time to face the scale of justice. The NDP MP delivered a powerful and eloquent farewell address to the House of Commons. As long as these halls echo with empty promises, I will not belong here. And there is a picture of her. She's speaking on a Zoom call. And if you look at a picture of this woman, you see that her face is disfigured with various tribal tattoos. According to Shannon Proudfoot, amid the usual sincere but banal expressions of hope and thanks, Nunavut MP Mumilak Quack Quack offered a remarkable and searing counterpoint with an eloquent and quiet fury. She painted a portrait of nearly 2 years spent at the House of Commons being shown that she did not belong and that no meaningful change was on offer for the people she represents, even as she was congratulated for her bravery in existing. Okay. I mentioned that this woman seems to have had no gainful employment before she was elected to the House of Commons at the age of 27. If you look at the average income for the provinces and territories of Canada, you will probably be surprised to find out that the Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut have the highest per capita incomes in all of Canada. And what is the reason for that? The reason for that is that in these three territories, and particularly in Nunavut, almost everyone with a job works for some level of government. There is almost no private employment in the territories, and especially in the Northwest Territories and in Nunavut. Let's see, this sad, terrified woman who apparently should be acclaimed, congratulated for her bravery in existing, begins, Mr. Speaker, every time I walk onto House of Commons grounds, speak in these chambers, I'm reminded every step of the way I don't belong here. I've never felt safe or protected in my position, especially within the House of Commons, often having pep talks with myself in the elevator or taking a moment in the bathroom stall to maintain my composure. When I walk through these doors, not only am I reminded of the clear colonial house on fire I am willingly walking into, I am already in survival mode. Since being elected, I expect to be stopped by security at my workplace. I've had security jog after me down hallways, nearly put their hands on me, and racial profile me as a member of Parliament. I know what to do in these situations. My life in Canada, and especially through this experience, has taught me many things. As a brown woman, do not move too quickly or suddenly. Do not raise your voice. Do not make a scene. Maintain eye contact and don't hide your hands, because as we all know, people who are non-white in Canada never raise their voice or make a scene. She writes she says that the reality is that this institution and the country have been created off the backs trauma and displacement of Indigenous people. Even if we're told we should run, we still face huge barriers. Young people have been told they're not experienced enough. Well, yes, a 27-year-old woman who's never had a job in her life could be judged to be not experienced enough, not ready to lead. Women have been told to sit pretty and listen. Disabled individuals have been shown they aren't even worth the conversations, and Inuit kill themselves at the highest rate in the country. We are facing a suicide epidemic, and this institution refuses to care. As for her being profiled inside the House of Commons, maybe it's true, maybe it isn't. I would suggest that a woman who has tribal tattoos on her face is likely to arouse suspicion. And she goes on for hundreds and hundreds of words, and as again is acclaimed for her braveness in existing. So this speech of hers created quite a commotion, and she was interviewed by various outlets. She said, I felt like I had to tell people what my plans were. No, I don't think so, because this woman is going to be very quickly forgotten. I feel, and I'm going to try not to cry during this, but I feel extremely isolated. I miss having a connection and feeling of normalcy in friendships. I miss talking to people about things that don't necessarily involve my work. She said that for the last few months, she spent a lot of time alone developing skills to create healthy outlets and tools for myself. Yes, okay. As I say, too sensitive to live. Politics is a tough business. And I thought everyone knew this, but this woman apparently did not, despite the fact that she is the type of person in my country who is congratulated for her very existence. Let's hear from another retiring Canadian MP. This is a story from Joan Bryden at the Canadian Press. Canada was excoriated as a racist, hypocritical failure Tuesday, as MPs who don't intend to seek re-election said their official farewells to Parliament. And I've already told you what Mumalak Quack Quack said. But here's Bloc Québécois MP Simon Marcil also blasted Canada's treatment of Indigenous people, calling Sir John A. Macdonald, Canada's first Prime Minister, a racist. But he spread his condemnation more broadly. He argued that the notion of Canada as a progressive, environmentally friendly, egalitarian, and democratic country is false on all fronts, citing examples aimed at proving the country's essential hypocrisy. He asserted that Canada stole the 1995 referendum on Quebec independence. He's right about that. And stole its symbols, the maple leaf and the beaver, from Quebec. He maintained Canada has only a fragile national identity in which Albertans are more proud to be Albertans and Quebecers more proud to be Quebecers than they are to be Canadians. The only distinguishing cultural feature, he added, is hockey. And even then, he noted, the Toronto Maple Leafs can't win. Ooh, sick burn. And another woman who is having trouble in her job is the leader of the Green Party. She is not, in fact, an MP. This is from Rachel Gilmore at Global News. So racist, so sexist, Annamie Paul slams bid to oust her as Green Party leader. She is firing back at what she described as a small group of councillors who she says were behind a push to dethrone her as the party's leader on Tuesday night. These councillors, Paul said, tried to force a vote of non-confidence on her leadership with no substantive consultation with the members they represent. They produced a list of allegations that were so racist, so sexist, that they were immediately disavowed by both of our MPs as offensive and inflammatory and contrary to party ethics. And I thank our MPs for that. See, what's happened here is that her leadership is in crisis because one of the party's three MPs, Jenica Atwin from New Brunswick, got into a ferocious spat about Israel and the Palestinians. And Annamie Paul had taken the position, that the fighting should stop, people are being killed, we need peace, etc. And she was attacked by others in the party for being insufficiently pro-Palestinian and was accused of being a racist. Annamie Paul is a Black woman from the Caribbean who is actually Jewish. And her spokesman delivered a ferocious denunciation of her critics, essentially saying that anyone who was not a supporter of Israel had no place in the party. So Atwin left the Green Party and joined the Liberal Party, only she was forced to essentially contradict what she had said in her response to the leader of the Green Party, because it looked like the Liberal Party was welcoming a member. Well, they had welcomed a member who was carrying on about Israeli apartheid. Now, so this woman's in trouble, but apparently it has nothing to do with her that she is, she's calling out Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau says he's a feminist, but he's not a feminist. Yeah, okay, all right. This is from Roberto Wakrell Cruz in the Post-Millennial. Green Party leader Annamie Paul held a press conference Wednesday evening after surviving a coordinated attempt by some in her party to kick her out of her position as leader. An emergency meeting held by the party's governing body decided to not go forward with a vote, which would have decided whether the party should go forward with her removal. Paul, who is Canada's first Black and Jewish woman to lead a federal party, went on to detail the amount of racism and sexism against her from unelected Green Party councillors. Well, that's pretty rich coming from a person who was not elected herself. To the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, I say to you today, you are no ally and you are no feminist. Your deeds and your words over these past weeks prove that definitely a real ally and feminist doesn't end their commitment to those principles whenever they come up against their personal ambition. To the people of Canada, I ask you directly, how many times will we allow Justin Trudeau to get away with pushing strong, competent, capable women out of politics when they're seeking to serve? And how much longer will we allow him to do it with impunity? Today, I am here to say that I am one woman that he will not push out of politics, and he can believe it. Well, it's not Justin Trudeau who is attempting to push Annamie Paul out of politics. It is members, perhaps a majority, of her own party. But, you know, she just can't help it. Just like the MP from Nunavut. I'm just a widow girl. Why are you picking on me? Yes, Chogokin 666. I'll hear none of it. That was a joke. I think it was Brian Mulrooney who carved off Nunavut from the Northwest Territories. And the number of times I heard that joke, I'll hear none of it. Hundreds of times. Steve says, paranoia and fantasies of persecution. Chogokin 666. Brown, aren't Eskimos red? Roulette Crack says, this sounds like a white man walking through Chicago. Competent women, that's an oxymoron, says Roulette Cracked. Gamion says, Princess Rockstar isn't capable of pushing anything with those noodle arms. She needs to calm down. And no federal rep can get me the $600 I'm due, says Chogokin 666, who adds, stupid people don't possess modesty. Gamion, how are these people not embarrassed? They should be embarrassed at least. Well, yes, they should be. Again, your job is just to vote, and you're told how to vote, and you have no responsibility whatsoever. You're not responsible for any government policy, and you are handsomely paid for doing so. But you got to take 8 months off because it's just all too much. The emotional labor is absolutely exhausting, or so they say. So they say. I don't mean to minimize the suicide problem in the Aboriginal communities in Canada, which is a very serious problem. But does this woman believe that the Trudeau government could pass some law which would stop people from killing themselves? It's a little more complicated than that. Okay. Oh, yes. Speaking of women who have, shall I say, emotional problems, here is a story by Emily Goodin from the Daily Mail. Fiona Hill, who served as Donald Trump's top Russia advisor, said she considered pulling a fire alarm or faking a medical emergency to end the then president's 2018 press conference with Vladimir Putin. My initial thought was just, how can I end this? I literally did have it in my mind, the idea of faking some kind of medical emergency and throwing myself backwards with a loud, curdling scream into the media. We were talking about embarrassment. Why is this woman telling the world this? Does she demand to be congratulated for her very existence? And she told CNN, I looked around to see if there was a fire alarm, but we were in a rather grand building attached to the Finnish palace that the Finnish president lent to us for the occasion, and I couldn't see anything that resembled a fire alarm. Hill, who was a witness in Trump's first impeachment trial in January 2020, said she was distressed at Trump's deferential behavior to Putin, that she tried to find ways to cut it off. At the controversial press conference in Helsinki after a meeting with Putin, Trump declined to support the U.S. government's assessment that Russia had interfered in the 2016 presidential election. U.S. government's assessment, no, the deep state's assessment. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it should be, Trump said of his conversation with Putin. Hill said it was a mortifying moment for the country. I just thought, let's cut this off and try to end it. I couldn't come up with anything that just wouldn't add to the terrible spectacle. It was one of those moments, frankly, that was mortifying and humiliating for the country, apparently mortifying and humiliating for you. Did no one notice before she rose to the position of the President of the United States, chief advisor on Russia? Did no one notice that this woman is emotionally unbalanced? Or did they notice and decide that it would be rude, uncharitable to make anything of it? So, yes, Canada apologizing for its history, going back to 1867, but especially a decade ago when a terrible, terrible thing happen. This is from Kaylin Small, Global News. Alberta NDP demands Jason Kenney apologizing for federal niqab policy as he denies ever supporting it. There's a push to have Alberta Premier Jason Kenney join his former federal colleagues in apologizing for a controversial niqab policy that was introduced a decade ago. The call ties back to when the Premier was the federal immigration minister. In 2011, he announced a ban on Muslim women wearing niqabs while taking the citizenship oath. In the past week, Conservative MPs have acknowledged that the policy stoked Islamophobia. The NDP wants Kenney, the architect of the policy, to apologize for what it calls promoting hatred towards Muslims. I'm calling on Jason Kenney to immediately apologize to Muslim Canadians for his racist words and actions, says Jasveer Dial, NDP critic for multiculturalism, on a Tuesday. Yes, his words are racist and he must apologize. Jasveer Dial tweeted yesterday, a little man must is not a word addressed to princes. Kenney says he has nothing to apologize for. My record on these matters could not be more clear. The Premier argued that as a minister, he supported and welcomed Muslims to Canada. I've never supported a proposed ban. To the contrary, I've always said Canada is a country that protects and respects religious freedom and pluralism, and the government has no business regulating what people wear. However, in a 2014 tweet, Kenney defended the policy, saying he believed people should take the citizenship oath with faces uncovered. And here is the tweet. I believe people taking the public oath of citizenship should do so publicly with their faces uncovered. Do you agree? This practice of face covering reflects a misogynistic view of women, which is grounded in a medieval tribal culture, Kenney said in 2015. While the government has no interest in regulating what people choose to wear in their private lives, when you come and swear a public oath in a court in front of a judge and your fellow citizens, we think it's eminently reasonable to ask that for those 30 seconds, you do so openly, publicly, and transparently as a proud new Canadian. And then we hear from Tim Uppal, who is another Sikh, apologizing, groveling for this 2001 oath, and Michelle Rempel-Garner also apologizing. Are they going to get Stephen Harper to apologize? I mean, the Conservative government does one good thing, but of course now they must apologize for it. Your mama says, Mark's got it backwards. First as farce, then as a tragedy. Roulette Crack says, I wish someone would do a joke mocking apology. I thought Marjorie Taylor Greene did one at the Holocaust Museum, but it turned out she was serious. Dawn Willis says, women are badass according to current culture. Why didn't she pull a knife from the inside of her thigh-high boots and charge? Gamian says, demanding competency and emotional stability on a job is sexist and racist. D.B. Cooper says, is there no one in the country that knows more about Russia than this stupid woman? What about that Professor Cohen that used to go on Fox? He was pretty good. What about Professor Pohl? Well, yes, Cohen, his first name is Stephen Cohen, a terribly controversial man because apparently he didn't want to start a nuclear war with Russia. D.B. Cooper says, this may have been asked recently, but will you consider reviewing Tariq Nasheed's homoerotic masterpiece, Buck Breaking? I thought about speaking about that on this live stream, and I read a bunch of stories, and I read his tweets, and I thought, this level of insanity is beyond my comprehension. Perhaps if I devoted more time to thinking about it, I could come up with something. I just, this memeing things into reality. There's a YouTube channel that's hosted by a young black man. It's called James versus Cinema, which I quite like. He's a friendly, intelligent voice. You know how it works. They show a movie and he watches it and he reacts to it. And he talks about movies which are, Marvel movies, big box office movies, but also he talks about art films as well. And it struck me, he's talking about white people as if they are people, just as he is a person. And it struck me, black people have been living with white people in America for what? 400 years. They know what white people are like. They know that white people are not witches, but a great many of them, including most of the elite, have memed themselves into believing that they don't understand anything about white people, that white people are totally alien to them, and that white people are witches. And, well, I guess as Laramie Hirsch would say, this is not going to end well. Let's talk about January the 6th. And we're finding more and more and more about what happened on January 6th. Of course, we still don't know the name of the police officer that shot Ashley Babbitt to death. Apparently, this is a state secret. And Tucker Carlson asked on his show last night, speaking of January the 6th, why are there still so many things, basic factual matters we don't know about that day? Why is the Biden administration preventing us from knowing? Why is the administration hiding more than 10,000 hours of surveillance tape from the U.S. Capitol? What could possibly be the reason for that? Even as they call for more openness, we need to get to the bottom of it. They could release those tapes today, but they're not. Why? We ought to be asking those questions urgently because, as the Attorney General reminded us, a lot depends on the answers. At least one news organization is. Revolver.news is a news site and turned out to be one of the last honest outlets on the internet. A new piece on the site suggests an answer to some of those questions. We know the government is hiding the identity of many law enforcement officers who were present at the Capitol on January 6th, not just the one who killed Ashley Babbitt. According to the government's own court filings, those law enforcement officers participated in the riot, sometimes in violent ways. We know that because, without fail, the government has thrown the book at most of the people who were in the Capitol on January 6th. There was a nationwide dragnet to find them. Many of them are still in solitary confinement tonight, but strangely, some people who participated in the riot haven't been charged. Look at the documents. The government calls these people unindicted co-conspirators. What does that mean? It means that in potentially every case, they're FBI operatives. For example, one of those unindicted co-conspirators is someone the government identifies only as Person 2. According to those documents, Person 2 stayed in the same hotel room as an insurrectionist called Thomas Caldwell, who's alleged to be a member of the group called the Oath Keepers. Person 2 also stormed the barricades at the Capitol on January 6th alongside Thomas Caldwell. The government's indictments further indicate that Caldwell, who, by the way, is a 65-year-old man, was led to believe there would be a quick reaction force also participating in January 6th. That quick reaction force, Caldwell was told, would be led by someone called Person 3, who had a hotel room and an accomplice. But wait, here's the interesting thing. Person 2 and Person 3 were organizers of the riot. The government knows who they are, but the government has not charged them. Why is that? You know why. They are almost certainly working for the FBI. So FBI operatives were organizing the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, according to government documents. And those two were not alone. In all, Revolver News reported that there are, quote, upwards of 20 unindicted conspirators in the Oath Keeper indictments, all playing various roles in the conspiracy who have not been charged for virtually the exact same activities, and in some cases, much, much more severe activities as those named alongside them and indictments. Asked Tucker Carlson. So it turns out this white supremacist insurrection was, again, by the government's own admission in these documents, organized, at least in part, by government agents. Are you shocked? You shouldn't be. In March, the FBI director admitted the Bureau is infiltrating as many dissident groups as it possibly could. Another news outlet, which has been covering this story assiduously, is American Greatness. And Julie Kelly has done fine work. She asks, who let Capitol protesters into the building on January 6th? By contradicting the groupthink, Senator Ron Johnson is taking fire from the usual suspects while most of his Senate colleagues remain silent. Judge Amit Mehta thinks no one let protesters into the Capitol building on January 6th. During a pre-trial detention hearing on Friday, Joe Biden's Justice Department continues to demand jail time for nonviolent offenders before their trials even begin. The D.C. District Court judge made that false claim. No one was let in. The Obama appointee told the lawyer representing Jason Dolan, an alleged oath keeper and former U.S. Marine with no criminal record. Meta denied the government's motion for detention, but admitted it was a close call. Meta, of course, is flat wrong. Videos taken by people at the Capitol show not only some U.S. Capitol police officers ushering protesters toward the building and allowing them to enter, but as American Greatness exclusively reported last month, United States Capitol police officers also cautioned several protesters how they should behave. In fact, in an anonymous interview with the Gateway Pundit in May, Dolan himself described how someone inside the Capitol opened the doors. Dolan was arrested 3 days after the interview was posted. The Justice Department, in a motion to keep Dolan incarcerated awaiting trial, called his story a conspiracy theory. In Meta's defense, he only has access to cherry-picked video evidence provided by the Justice Department, which is keeping more than 14,000 hours of surveillance footage captured by the USCP security system under seal by insisting the recordings are highly sensitive government material. Judges, defense attorneys, and Capitol defendants are at the mercy of whatever damning clips federal prosecutors produce for any given case. A select group of lawmakers, however, is authorized to view the raw footage. Senator Ron Johnson is one of them. As ranking member of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, Johnson has directed his staff to closely examine the recordings to get a detailed account of what happened that day. Johnson's office already has flagged a slice of footage that may seriously undermine the accepted narrative perpetuated by federal judges in court hearings and nearly everyone else that insurrectionists broke into the building without permission. In a letter to acting U.S. Capitol Police Chief Yogananda Pittman last week, Johnson zeroed in on the suspicious activity of several individuals around 2:30 p.m., right before more than 300 protesters entered the building through doors on the Upper West Terrace. Moments before, according to Johnson's letter, an unauthorized person tried unsuccessfully to open a set of double doors. 5 people returned to the double doors shortly thereafter and walked past a USCP officer. The security footage, which did not include audio, appeared to show the police officer gesturing towards the doors as these individuals walked past him. Once at the double doors, one of the 5 individuals pushed the left door's crash bar, and this time it opened. All 5 individuals exited the building at approximately 2:33 p.m. But the last person to leave the door ajar, allowing people from outside of the building to gain entry into the Capitol. At 2:34 p.m., as people began to enter through this door, the police officer who was in the vicinity of this door 1 minute earlier walked into another hallway away from this door and out of the view of the security camera. For nearly 15 minutes, Johnson estimates 309 people entered the Capitol building while law enforcement did little to stop them. The video in question also captured the moment a USCP officer shot and killed Ashley Babbitt, an unarmed female Air Force veteran. Around the time that Ashley Babbitt was shot, security footage showed one of the 5 police officers at this Upper West Terrace doorway looking over his shoulder toward the interior of the Capitol building. At that point, this officer appeared to say something to another officer standing in front of him. Both officers, followed by their 3 other colleagues, appeared to slowly retreat from the doorway, allowing a surge of people to, once again, enter the building. So who were the mystery men? If they were unauthorized, the individuals couldn't have been congressional staffers or USCP officers, or could they be? Were they the paid agitators many people on the ground that day continued to insist provoked the siege? Unlike most of his Republican colleagues, Johnson, who has not yet announced whether he will run for re-election next year, thankfully is pushing back on some of the central claims about January 6th. Johnson correctly concludes that the protest was not a so-called armed insurrection since no handguns were found at the scene. FBI Director Chris Wray last week confirmed Johnson's statement in testimony before the House Judiciary Committee. You don't hear too many people calling it an armed insurrection anymore. They dropped the armed part, he told me. Well, one of the things we've learned about January 6th is that the media is pushing the line that it's Donald Trump who is responsible for people being continued to be imprisoned over what happened on January 6th because Trump keeps talking about November the 6th, which is an exceedingly curious reading of the law. Tucker Carlson says that the FBI has crossed a line, and not for the first time. They crossed that line in Michigan. Remember that plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer? And Whitmer is able to cover some of her own incompetence, although not all, by pointing to the fact that she's not a victim. In the FBI's telling, a whole team of insurrectionists was going to drive a van up to Gretchen Whitmer's vacation house and throw her in the back and drive away. The mastermind, the Bureau said, was a man called Adam Fox. Who was Adam Fox? He turned out to be a homeless guy who was living in the basement of a vacuum repair shop. The whole story was a farce, insulting, really. But if you read the government's charging documents carefully, you'll see that it gets even more ridiculous. It turns out that one of the people in the planned Gretchen Whitmer kidnap van was an FBI agent. In the van, another was an FBI informant. The feds admit that an informant or undercover agent was usually present in the group's meetings. In other words, nearly half the gang of kidnappers were working for the FBI. Remember the guy who suggested using a bomb to blow up a bridge as part of the plot? That got a lot of coverage. That guy was an undercover FBI agent. Well, it appears that it is feds all the way down. Here from the Daily Mail, White House calls Capitol riot a terrorist attack, introduces Pentagon anti-radicalization to stop the lethal rise of white supremacy in the military, and pushes to purge the internet of extremist content. What constitutes extremist content, according to the White House? Breitbart News? How about the Remnant newspaper? I seriously would not be surprised if they consider that to be extremist content. The Pentagon is to start training for service members leaving the military to prevent them being radicalized by violent extremists. It follows a review that stated that the most dangerous elements of the threat today come from white supremacists and anti-government extremists. The White House also called the Capitol riot a domestic terrorist attack in a report released Tuesday and backed a purge of extremist content online. The strategy includes $100 million for the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security for analysts, prosecutors, and investigators. Well, why would they need $100 million to hire new people? Aren't the people working there already sufficient to do that job? In addition, the Department of Defense is incorporating training for service members separating retirements in the military who may potentially be targeted by those who seek to radicalize them. And in related news, Joe Biden, this is from Citizen Free Press. Joe Biden's administration announced their plans to create ways for Americans to report radicalized friends and family to the government in an effort to fight domestic terrorism. In a conversation with reporters, one senior administration official explained the importance of stopping politically fueled violence before it starts. Quote, "This involves creating contexts in which those who are family members or friends of coworkers know that there are pathways and avenues to raise concerns and seek help for those who they have perceived to be radicalizing and potentially radicalizing towards violence. Any particular tech company often knows its own platform very well, but the government sees things, actually threats of violence, across platforms. They see the relationship between online recruitment, radicalization, and violence in the physical world. This is a strategy that is agnostic as to political ideology or off the spectrum. What matters is when individuals take their political or other grievances and turn that unacceptably, unlawfully into violent action. There are already laws against that. We are investing many agencies of the government and resourcing them appropriately and asking our citizens to participate, because ultimately this is really about homeland security being a responsibility of each citizen of our country to help us achieve. The Biden administration has come very close to declaring war on its political enemies. Well, former deputy director of the FBI saying recently that we've got to start arresting members of Congress. And yet Joe Biden apparently has the chutzpah to lecture Vladimir Putin on political freedom. Again, from the Mail, President Biden has falsely claimed that, quote, criminal MAGA rioters killed Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, despite a medical examiner ruling he died of natural causes. Biden made the incorrect statement on Wednesday at a press conference in Geneva following his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. His response came after he was asked to respond to Putin's comments about why he banned protests in Russia. That saw the Russian leader say he did not want a repeat of the January 6th riots in his country or for groups like Black Lives Matter to form there. I think that's a ridiculous comparison, Biden said when asked for his reaction to Putin's comments. It's one thing for literally criminals to break through a cordon, go into the Capitol, kill a police officer, and be held unaccountable than it is for people objecting and marching on the Capitol and saying, you are not allowing me to speak freely, you are not allowing me to do A, B, C, or D. And so they're very different criteria. Every single thing that Biden said about what happened on January 6th in Washington, D.C. is untrue. The District of Columbia's chief medical examiner ruled in April that Sicknick died of natural causes after suffering 2 strokes following the Capitol riots. It was widely assumed at the time that he had died from injuries sustained during the January 6th attack. Investigators initially believed that he had been struck by a fire extinguisher, but that was later disproven. They also thought at first that his death may be linked to ingesting a chemical irritant that he was sprayed with during the riots. The strokes, however, weren't related to any injuries he might have sustained during the riots, according to the medical examiner's determination. Well, there was a great mystery about Sicknick's death. Why did it take so long for the authorities to state the cause of death? And it's really quite obvious why it took so long, because they were moving heaven and earth to somehow prove that Sicknick's death was a murder. Okay, let's see. Jogakin666 says, yes, I wonder if Amnesty International or the ACU will get involved. Burkan Sultanov says, a man should be judged by the character of his enemies. DB Cooper says, pretty much everything Putin said was true. I saw that dork Pompeo and some CIA officer in a Fox News clip saber rattling about it. The ruling class are alternately evil or stupid. David Wright says, this isn't the same KMG from Luke Ford. A change was made. Really? In what way? No, I'm genuinely interested in this. Don Willis says, THX 1138 seems friendly and warm compared to current behind-the-scenes scheming, gaslighting, and plotting. Jim Smith says, why has virtually all talk of an Antifa role in January 6th all but disappeared? A day or two before January 6th, there was news of 5 busloads of Antifa entering D.C., but nothing was heard of them afterwards. Well, actually, there was a fellow who sold footage to CNN, and he was Antifa or Antifa related, and he is on video congratulating himself and his friends for what they had pulled off in the Capitol on January the 6th. Sultanov says Russian-speaking hackers based in Eastern European country with significant Russian population. VDR, hello VDR, Box Day Respecter. KMG doesn't move from that chair. That's how the cables stay put. I guess I've been lucky. Again from VDR, it's funny how people were Yas Queen slaying the black reporter who confronted Putin today. I thought it was cringe, and his response was pretty great. Funny how differently we see the world. Well, you know, this woman needs to be congratulated for her very existence. How can we in good conscience, do any less? I really enjoy Darren Beatty's work, says Manfred von Thistlebaum, as do I. I didn't know until just a few days ago that I suppose he is behind Revolver.News. 2 king-size beds, Hotel Chad. Yes. I'm sick of the bedspreads. They're lurid, you know. Actually, I'm sick of the whole business. I've been here since December the 17th, and I was here for a few weeks last summer. I really wish this would come to an end. Congress just passed a bill making Juneteenth a federal holiday. Seriously? Seriously? Okay. Here we go. Let's take a look at this. This is from CBS News, Zoe Poindexter. The House on Wednesday passed legislation that would make June 19th, or Juneteenth, a federal holiday marking the end of slavery in the U.S. The bill passed unanimously in the Senate Tuesday and will now go to President Biden's desk for his signature, which would make June the nation's 12th federal holiday. And I'm looking at a very strange flag, which is held up in front of the White House, that it has the stars, but that rectangle is black. And there are black, red, and green stripes, 13 of them. Does anyone know the provenance of this flag? On behalf of all who have waited for this, yes, waited for a federal holiday celebrating something that no one had heard of until last year. Yes, I thank them, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee said after the vote. There is more to come in changing lives for justice, equality, and freedom. That is what happened today. Jackson Lee and Senator Ed Markey each introduced Juneteenth bills last summer in the wake of George Floyd's death at the hands of a white police officer, because obviously the one has very much to do with the other, but neither received a floor vote. The two lawmakers reintroduced their bills earlier this year with broad bipartisan support. Senator Ron Johnson, a close ally to former President Donald Trump, had previously blocked the bill in the Senate, citing its cost and lack of debate on the topic. On Tuesday, he said he would no longer object to the bill because it is clear that there is no appetite in Congress to further discuss this matter. The bill passed 415 to 14. All of the no votes were cast by Republicans. Representative Matt Rosendale, the first Republican to announce he would vote no, said he saw the bill as an attempt to celebrate identity politics. We should be focused on what unites us rather than our differences, he said. For many Black Americans, especially those from the southern states, Juneteenth, also known as Emancipation Day or Freedom Day, has been an important day in history for over 150 years. Well, I suppose, one could do one of those Google searches to find out just how many times the word Juneteenth was mentioned in recent previous years. How many times, for instance, did a Representative Sheila Jackson Lee talk about Juneteenth? How many PBS specials have there been on Juneteenth? And if there have been, when were they, how recently were they made? Again, this is memeing. This is memeing lies into truth. This is a tweet from Josh Gerstein. Representative Paul Gosar, Republican of Arizona, at the House hearing says Capitol Police officer was lying in wait for Ashley Babbitt before shooting her. Again, says Babbitt was executed by police and demands the name of the officer involved in the shooting. When some Black man gets shot or dies in police custody, and this happens, several dozen times a year, the identity of that police officer is known almost immediately. Why is the identity of the officer who shot Ashley Babbitt, why is this considered a state secret? If she was indeed an insurrectionist, as the government claims, shouldn't the U.S. Capitol Police be proud of what they did? And what else do we have here? U.S. to take steps against white supremacists and militia groups. This is from Reuters. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland will release a plan for increased information sharing. Yes, if you see something, say something. And of course, we're not going to see any false reports of extremist thinking or potential extremist activity made against people in order to ruin their lives. Would we? No, no, no. People aren't that wicked. And Henry Delacroix writes in The American Sun, The post-Trump right is disorganized right now, but a Trumpian policy set seems to be forming. The economic nationalism and populism he pitched seems here to stay. A deeper shift is occurring that has gone unnoticed. The pundit class has begun to call things anti-white. This is a noticeable shift that has occurred with no real change from the left. The right calls the rhetoric and messaging from the left anti-white. Even the softest of pundits, Rod Dreher, has joined the chorus. These same media figures avoided this in 2020 during the BLM rioting, which was chock full of anti-white signs and chants. That was called anti-American. Anyone prior to this trying to point out the melange of government-enforced policies, judicial decisions, and bureaucratic regulations that actively suppressed whites was a conspiracy theorist. It was beyond the pale to make an argument that the American system actively constructed rules that were anti-white. The meritocracy myth worked really well, despite easily measured disparities of the qualities of different ethnic or racial groups selected for universities, med school programs, etc. What changed? The change may be that critical race theory became an explicit expression of the civil rights infrastructure laced with language scapegoating whites and the desire to implement it in schools for children. This was all woven into our universities, though. Why didn't they care? The right has or had a false impression that the university system was a self-contained ecosystem with little effect on broader culture. Universities are insane was what they could say as cope. Critical race theory is an easy target because it is so explicit in its anti-white messaging. It is another step in the scapegoating that leads to ethnic conflict or targeting by authorities. Finally, the loose conspiracy theory that could string together a lot of policies that were implicit as a tangible, explicit target. It's simple and can be a catch-all for the left's broader mood. The left knows this, so is falling back on obfuscation, denial, and calling the right hysterical. The left also made an error of going explicit. The American victim culture makes our political battles ridiculous by the framing always being more difficult for the supposed aggressors. America's old culture war was the left aggressively trying to upend American traditions and norms. This changed in the 1990s with the right being seen as aggressors trying to change the status quo. This can be tied back to Pat Buchanan's famous 1992 RNC speech. Buchanan was merely saying that all the weird things the left pushed had to be fought. We had to defend our norms and fight back. What this speech did was allow the media to frame the right as the aggressors and a disruptive force in the culture war. It is a frame that sticks even today. The left continually upends the status quo to create a new protected class for the central power to use, but the right is the force seen as the aggressor. This move to explicitly making calls for equity and policy change as solves to racial grievance exposes mainstream America to the insanity on campuses. It now creates a reaction. That is why the left is trying to obfuscate what CRT is, just as the New York Times attacked Trump's anti-CRT executive order as banning sensitivity training and never quoting the training materials. The left knows it is caught and its word can be used against them. They still hold all the cards, but states can make moves to fight this. A danger to the left is red state governments going after grievance study funding at universities and curriculum there at the root of the problem. The real danger for the status quo is that identity politics becomes a white thing and that more whites see that the left is full-on eliminationist now. As an object of discussion, CRT allows all those insane, peer-reviewed published papers to see sunlight. The academics that write those papers staff NGOs and bureaucracies. There can be no happy compromise. Going after this insanity can make a backbencher leap to prominence at the state level. There is now a name for the poison that regular people have felt but never quite understood for years. And Henry Delacroix concludes, there is no going back. Well, from your pen to God's ear. So you probably have heard about BlackRock buying up all of these houses in the United States, and they're only going to be for rent. You can't buy them because Americans are going to be forced to live in Pottersville. Well, there is no stupid or evil American idea which is not imitated in Canada, and we learned from Rachel Youngley at the Globe and Mail, condo developer plans to buy $1 billion worth of single-family homes in Canada for rentals. Detached houses, hundreds of them across Ontario, with the plan of renting them and profiting on the housing crisis ripping across the country. Core Development Group Limited is building a large-scale single-family home rental operation, an unproven business model in Canada, where the market is fragmented and individual investors lease a small number of their own properties for income. Institutional house rentals have become highly lucrative in the United States, with private equity firms, pension funds, and big companies throwing billions of dollars into the asset class. In Canada, deep-pocketed investors, as well as real estate investment trusts, have already acquired hundreds of apartment buildings to tap into the strong rental demand, but have not yet moved into rental houses. Core founder Corey Houghton and Executive Vice President Farhan Latifat questioned why there wasn't a similar business in Canada, which has had a rental vacancy rate below 3% since the turn of the century. We were trying to answer the question, why is nobody doing this in Canada? We could not come up with an objective answer to that. In Canada, it works as well or better than the US. Core is targeting 8 mid-sized cities in Ontario, and this year started buying properties in Kingston, St. Catharines, London, Barrie, Hamilton, Peterborough, and Cambridge. It will soon start buying in Guelph. Yes, Pottersville for all. And oh, yes, I was complaining about e-scooters. Was it yesterday? I believe so. And the fight against e-scooters seems to be gaining publicity. Emily Crane at the Daily Mail. Electric scooters and e-bikes have been spotted running red lights, going against traffic, and narrowly missing pedestrians in New York City after Gone Girl actress Lisa Baines became the latest New Yorker to be struck down and killed by one of the two-wheelers. The Daily Mail observed a number of people on e-scooters and e-bikes across Manhattan this week, including dozens running red lights at high speed. Others were spotted driving electric scooters and bikes the wrong way down streets, swerving into incoming traffic, and narrowly missing pedestrians crossing at traffic lights. Some also illegally rode their electric scooters and e-bikes along sidewalks. A number of people were even seen running red lights at the same intersection in the Upper West Side, where Baines, 65, was struck down 10 days ago by a hit-and-run scooter rider. And the Daily Mail provides us with many pictures of this. In the wake of Baines's death, Mayor Bill de Blasio Tuesday called for tougher regulations on e-scooters. Local community boards have also been voting to ban electric bikes following a series of crashes and near misses. Real estate broker Kelly Killian, 54, was killed after she was struck by a delivery man on an e-bike in Astoria, Queens, May 28th. Hing Chung, 71, died just days after he was struck by an e-bike and suffered head trauma on April 17th on the Upper West Side. And I think I'm going to talk about Billie Eilish. You know, we may have seen rumors that the record charts are fixed. They're not supposed to be fixed because they're supposed to rely upon, data taken at source. In the old days, before the scanning, the chart makers would call up record shops and say, what are your top sellers? And some clerk at a record shop would give a list, which may have been the top sellers, but may have included records which he liked and were not hits. Billie Eilish's latest single, Lost Cause, is an actual lost cause. Image change from slacker to femme fatale may be the cause. The single has, this is from June the 6th, the single has dropped to number 59. It's dead. Lots of money is being poured into it with advertising, billboards, etc. But you can't make people like a song. The fans are not taking to these two songs, crossing fingers for better singles when the album arrives. Eilish and her brother Phineas have certainly demonstrated their hitmaker abilities, and Eilish is popular as ever. But a change in image from slacker girl to pinup last month in Vogue, going platinum blonde with a Marilyn Monroe hairstyle, may have been too much of a jolt for her loyal followers. That's the only explanation for this abrupt sales drop. No, Roger Friedman, I don't believe it is the only explanation. But could it be that people are... Billie Eilish had this multicolored hair. Essentially, she wore sacks. She had no facial expression at all. And we're supposed to believe that because it turns out that she is rather attractive and has decided not to hide that people are angry about this. Bryony Jewell writes, Billie Eilish has been accused of queer baiting by confused followers after she shared a slew of behind-the-scenes snaps from her Lost Cause video. In the images, the singer, 19, frolics with her female pals at a party and puts on an animated display, sticking out her tongue while they all pose together. However, after sharing the edgy pictures with the caption, I love girls, Billie came under fire in the comments, with some of her 86.9 million fans questioning her actions. Well, if Billie Eilish actually has 86.9 million fans, then by necessity, any single that she released would become a hit. And again, why have the latest two not been hits? A TikTok user with the handle WAP Lover uploaded a message in which she penned, acting sexual with girls to draw in more audience is gross. Some music lovers suggested Billie might be coming out in the post, and others praised her video, saying she looked confident and stunning as ever. Despite the praise, others were a little uneasy about it and wrote, funny she is posing this in June, Pride Month. Bestie, you better not be queer baiting. Another added, I literally cannot. It's like if she's coming out, good for her, but if she claims to be straight after this, bestie, it's queer baiting. Sorry. I'm not really familiar with that term. The old meaning of it, but now it means people who pretend to be homosexual when they're not homosexual. Well, if that is the case, pretty much every entertainer in North America under the age of 40 is engaged in queer baiting because it's become de rigueur for them to claim that they are non-binary, even if they're married to a man. De rigueur. The Urban Dictionary defines queer baiting as a marketing technique used to attract queer viewers that involves creating romantic or sexual tension between two same-sex characters, but never making it canon or evolving on it. Rich Ferraro, Chief Communications Officer at GLAAD, added to the idea, saying it can sometimes be called gay baiting. Oh, okay. So is this the tremendous sin that Billie Eilish committed, which explains why her latest songs have not been hits? Did GLAAD and the like, gay establishment, saying, no, Billie, you cannot have any more hits because your behavior has disappointed us? Is that how it works now? I wouldn't be surprised. Manfred von Thistlebaum says, haha, queerbait was a common insult back when I was in school. Roulette Crack says, oversized sweater, large bosom, Shane. Dawn Willis says, she has talent, I have to admit, as much as it pains me. Neil Terry says, I heard one of her songs, hearing her voice. She should call Dr. Drew, so he can do his love line trick and diagnose the age at which she was molested. Oh, dear. Yes, Roulette Crack points out, it's like when Adele lost weight, she was accused of abandoning the fatties. Yes, we loved you because you were fat. Really? Is that why you loved Adele? Because she was fat? That's a pretty foolish reason to claim to like anyone's music. And then she lost a whole bunch of weight, probably through surgery. And now she looks 10, 20 times better. And apparently this enrages some people. Oh, we have a joke here from Popcasso 88. Billie Eilish's new album, certified aluminum. So I think I'm going to wrap it up at this point. Tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and I'm going to be discussing a movie from 2015. It's a documentary called Hitchcock Truffaut. Very entertaining, although I will point out that it is effectively a audiovisual gloss on the book called Hitchcock Truffaut, which has hundreds of stills from Hitchcock movies explaining the effects and how he managed to achieve effects in his movies. And on the book club on Friday, I'm going to be discussing a strange and delightful book called Immortal Life by Stanley Bing, described as a soon-to-be true story. Yes, the quest for longevity. How far can this be pushed? Transhumanism, is it here yet? We seem to be on the verge of it, and that's our book for this Friday. Thank you for tuning in. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. Oh, here's a comment from Neil Terry, which I like. Aside from pride being the literal original sin of the devil, the choice of the rainbow was an obviously antagonistic choice. When I was a kid, it was still understood as a sign of God's grace. Just so. Antagonistic not only to Christians, but projecting a challenge to God himself, begging for another flood. You know, if you like this live stream and would like to make a donation to it, which I could quite honestly very much use at the time, because I'm 8 days away from, well, having to leave this lovely hotel for lack of money to pay for another month. If you'd like to make a donation, God bless you. You can make it through PayPal at kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, a donation to the live stream can be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.